They thought they were cuffing just another suspect, one more name for the paperwork, one more arrest that no one would question. But when that same man showed up the next day, not behind bars, but beside the judge, not in a jumpsuit, but in a tailored suit with the authority to audit their entire department, the story cracked open. This wasn't a wrongful arrest. It was a reckoning in disguise, because Kenton Morrow didn't just walk free. He walked back in, with power they didn't see coming, proof in hand, and a mandate to expose the exact system that tried to erase him. And the twist? He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. It started on a crisp Boise morning just after 9. Officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer were sipping lukewarm coffee in their cruiser when the call crackled through. Black male, mid-30s S, navy jacket, suspected in a vehicle break-in on Madison Avenue. They didn't ask for more details. They didn't request backup or a witness report. Brent nodded toward a man outside Grange Bakehouse. Croissant in one hand, phone in the other, calm and still like he had nowhere urgent to be. "There he is," Brent muttered. It was less identification and more instinct. Lynn was already halfway out the cruiser before the tires stopped. "Hands where I can see them," she barked. The man, Kenton, looked up, startled but not shaken. "I'm waiting for my driver," he said, tone even. "But logic doesn't slow adrenaline." "You fit the description," Brent added, hand near his holster. Kenton blinked once, confusion flickering. "Outside a bakery?" he asked. That's all it took. Brent grabbed his arm and spun him, hard. "You're resisting!" he shouted, loud enough for phones to hear. Kenton didn't pull back. He didn't speak again. He just looked down. At the pavement, at the cuffs, at the path they'd decided for him before he even opened his mouth. Lynn snorted. "They always get mouthy until the cuffs go on," Brent chuckled. "Probably another guy with a fake LinkedIn and a law degree from nowhere. They didn't ask for ID, they didn't check the phone, they ignored the bakery bag with a visible receipt. They drove off, joking about the report they'd file. But Brent couldn't stop glancing in the mirror. Kenton didn't look mad. He looked like he was taking notes. At the station, the arrest felt routine, until it didn't. Rob Tesh, the booking officer, raised a brow. "You sure about this one?" he asked. Brent waved him off. "Loitering, fit the call, no big deal." Kenton stood silent. Then, "I'd like my phone call." Rob entered the name and froze. The screen blinked twice. "This address," he said, mostly to himself. "You calling your lawyer?" Brent joked. "No," Kenton said. "The Attorney General's office." Brent laughed like it was a punchline, but Rob wasn't laughing. Neither was the terminal, because within minutes the quiet turned into emails, credentials, and a state-issued alert. No press, no drama, just a quiet command for immediate release and internal notification under Article 14 of the Law Enforcement Integrity Act. Kenton didn't ask for it. He triggered it. 45 minutes later, Kenton walked out, not escorted, not questioned, just released, flanked by 2 officials in state-issued suits. Brent saw him pass in the hallway and blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "That's not possible," he whispered. Lynn stared, confused. Rob Tesh said nothing, just typed something into a system they weren't authorized to see. Kenton didn't look back. He didn't gloat. But that silence, the kind that hums with weight, stuck. Brent and Lynn didn't know it yet, but they hadn't arrested a man that morning. They'd triggered a review. Because Kenton Morrow wasn't the story they thought they were writing. He was the one holding the pen. Kenton didn't walk out of the precinct like a man who'd been rescued. He walked out like he was right on time. No handcuffs, no apologies, just 2 plain-suited state officials at his side, and a silence thick enough to drown a siren. Brent caught sight of him from the hallway, still in uniform, still sure this was some clerical mistake, but his gut twisted before he could even name why. "That's not possible," he muttered. eyes locked on the man they'd arrested just an hour before. Lynn leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, but Kenton didn't look back. No smirk, no stare, down. He simply walked, and as the glass doors closed behind him, the metaphor snapped into place. The prisoner had left, but the real sentence had only just begun, and it wasn't his to serve. The precinct didn't break into chaos, it broke into whispers. One by one, officers started asking questions they weren't used to asking. Who is he? What did Rob see on that screen? Why did legal call our captain before noon? Nobody knew for sure, but everyone had a theory, and each one came with a little more unease. Kenton's name showed up on a whiteboard in a back office next to a question mark, and the phrase, OCA? Office of Civil Accountability? The walls hadn't cracked, but they had started to lean. People lowered their voices when Brent walked by. Lynn noticed a few sidelong glances she couldn't place. Conversations about shift schedules were suddenly interrupted by long, uncomfortable pauses when the word audit was whispered near a copy machine. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was something worse. Anticipation. By the time the captain called a closed-door meeting that afternoon, the truth was already bleeding into the air. Kenton Morrow wasn't a lawyer with a big mouth. He was the state-appointed special counsel for civil accountability, a position only 3 people in Idaho held. He didn't file complaints, he initiated reviews. He didn't threaten lawsuits, he triggered department-wide audits with a phone call. His background wasn't noise, it was structure. Political science at UC Davis, Stanford Law, 10 years in oversight in Alameda County, known quietly among city attorneys as the guy who doesn't need headlines to get results. He had access to databases Brent didn't even know existed. While most people demand justice loudly, Kenton delivered it like a lab report, precise, detailed, unemotional. He wasn't a hammer, he was a forensic light, and now that light was pointed directly at them. Brent tried to brush it off at first, clinging to the ritual phrases that had always protected them. We followed protocol. We acted on a dispatch. He didn't comply right away, but every time he said it, the words felt thinner, like the paper in those intake forms they filled out every shift. Lynn stood by him, arms crossed, tighter than usual, but her confidence had a crack now, like something old was finally wearing through. The emails started the next morning. Incident report revision requested. Body cam footage verification required. Chain of command confirmation pending. What was once routine was now radioactive. Brent started waking up earlier, checking his messages more often, replaying the stop in his head, except now he noticed things he didn't want to see. The receipt in Kenton's bag, the way he never raised his voice, the flicker of recognition in Rob Tesch's face. The truth is, it wasn't guilt that shook them, it was recognition. Recognition that they'd treated a man with power like someone disposable. Recognition that he'd walked in with the one thing they never prepared for: proof. The system they leaned on wasn't broken by noise. It was being unraveled by calm, calculated truth. And if you're still here, still watching, then you already know this isn't just about Kenton. This is about what happens when power is finally forced to look in the mirror. Don't scroll past that moment. Don't pretend you haven't seen it before. Share this story. Speak its name. Because silence only protects those who built the wall, and stories like this are the first swing of the hammer. Stay with us. We're just getting started. Brent Halcroft polished his badge twice before stepping into the courthouse. Lynn Mercer adjusted her collar in the reflection of the glass entry doors. To them, this was routine. Another day, another courtroom, another appearance where their uniforms did most of the talking. They walked in like they owned the floor, boots clicking with confidence, posture squared with protocol. The case was simple: obstruction during a suspected vehicle break-in, a paperwork victory. No media, no defense firestorm, just a quick statement, a judge's nod, and back to patrol. But what they didn't know was that the room had already shifted. Because they were used to being the voice of order. But today, They were just echoes in a room where the story had already changed. It hit Brent first when the bailiff asked, "You're Halcroft and Mercer?" "Courtroom 2C. Simple, direct. Then came the pause. "You're testifying in the Morrow Review, correct?" Brent blinked. "Review?" Lynn leaned in. "We're here for the Morrow case. He's the defendant." The bailiff shook his head once and just pointed. "You'll see." And what they saw when they stepped into 2C stopped them cold. The room wasn't filled with scattered spectators. It was packed with journalists, city council reps, and 2 camera crews quietly prepping in the back. At the front table, not in the gallery, not near a public defender, sat Kenton Morrow. Dark suit, binder open, calmly flipping pages. The nameplate in front of him read, "Special Counsel, Civil Accountability Office, State of Idaho." Lynn's throat tightened. Brent's jaw twitched. This wasn't a trial, it was a review hearing, and they weren't the witnesses. They were the examined. They had walked in expecting to testify against a suspect, but they were standing in a room designed to hold them accountable. The judge entered and brought the room to order, but her words didn't follow any familiar script. Today's session concerns the procedural review of an incident on Madison Avenue. Mr. Morrow will serve in an advisory role representing the Civil Accountability Office. That's when Brent felt his stomach twist, because Kenton hadn't just walked in. He'd arrived with permission to tear down everything they thought was routine. When the judge called Brent and Lynn forward, they moved like machines. But the certainty had drained from their bodies. The questions came crisp and clear. "Can you walk us through your reasoning for detaining Mr. Morrow?" Brent cleared his throat. "We received a dispatch. Black male, mid-30s, navy jacket." The judge cut in. "Was ID verified prior to detainment?" Lynn jumped in. "He fit the description and didn't comply when we gave verbal command." Kenton hadn't looked up the entire time. But now, he clicked his pen once. It was a small sound, but it echoed. Then it was Kenton's turn. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He just opened his folder and said, "In my line of work, I've read hundreds of reports that start the same way. Vague descriptions, unchecked assumptions, and procedural shortcuts that turn bias into muscle memory." He placed one sheet forward. "Here's the dispatch log. It described me, but it didn't authorize physical detainment without verification." Another document. "Here's the footage. It shows I made no evasive movements, I spoke clearly, I held a visible receipt, no search was conducted." Then another. "And here's the departmental guideline, both officers certified last year, protocols for ID verification before use of force." Kenton didn't pound the table, he didn't lecture. He dropped receipts, and each one landed harder than the last. He closed the binder slowly and nodded to the judge. "I move that direct testimony be suspended. Internal review has already been authorized. A full hearing is scheduled in 2 weeks. The judge paused for only a breath, then nodded. "Granted." Brent and Lynn stepped back from the bench like the floor had shifted underneath them, because it had. No shouting, no confrontation, but the message was deafening. Kenton hadn't walked in to prove innocence. He came to display failure, and he did it with documents, not drama. As they returned to their seats, every eye in the courtroom stayed on them, but not with respect, with scrutiny. Kenton gathered his materials and stood. He didn't look at Brent. He didn't glance at Lynn. He just nodded to the judge, turned, and walked out. The press followed. The cameras rolled. But the courtroom stayed quiet. No gasps, no verdicts, just an unspoken understanding that everything had changed. He hadn't won the courtroom, he'd flipped the board. And if you think that kind of justice doesn't matter, think again. Share this story. Tell someone who still believes quiet power can't move walls. Because Kenton didn't come for applause, he came to remind us that silence isn't safety, it's strategy. And when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't yell. It leaves you with nothing left to say. Back at the precinct, the aftermath didn't roar. It whispered. A new poster appeared near the squad room coffee station. Civil Accountability Hotline, confidential. monitored by state oversight. The font wasn't big, but the weight of it was immediate. Officers glanced at it and then looked away like it might blink back. Brent saw it on his way in and paused longer than he meant to. Lynn didn't say a word, but her eyes tracked him from across the hallway. Conversations that used to carry over the hum of vending machines now ended mid-sentence when Brent entered the room. The old jokes didn't land anymore. The usual gossip dissolved into murmurs. The break-room chairs were still warm, but the trust had gone cold. The shield didn't break. It just got a crack that spread, and everyone could hear it every time the silence stretched too long. 3 days later, Brent opened his inbox to find an email marked Urgent, Review, Summary, Incident 1442 from K. Morrow, attached 48 pages. The subject line wasn't emotional. The content didn't have to be. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't even just about Lynn. It was about patterns. The first page listed stop logs going back 5 years. The next few outlined arrest records, complaint files, body cam upload discrepancies. Then came a spreadsheet with names: Julian York, Alan Rivers, every name followed by timestamps, neighborhood zones, and a note under Outcome, no charges filed. Brent scrolled, breath tightening. He found a report he didn't even remember writing because it had sounded so routine at the time. Fit the description: non-compliant tone, suspicious location. The irony punched through like a steel rod. The pattern wasn't in what they wrote, it was in what they never had to. When the hearing opened, it didn't feel like a trial. It felt like a slow dissection. No courtroom, no jury, just a gray municipal conference room off Fairview, with carpet too clean and chairs too straight. Brent sat with his hands folded tighter than usual. Lynn was 2 seats down, her folder unopened. Around the table sat people he'd never met. Someone from the State Ethics Board, a data analyst, 2 from the Attorney General's office. No uniforms, no guns, just eyes. And at the head of the table, Kinton entered quietly. No entourage, no dramatic pause, just a folder, same one from court, and a nod to the board. No press, no podium, just the weight of what no one else had ever said out loud. The chair called the hearing to order. No gavel, just one phrase: "We are here to examine conduct over time." Because this wasn't about a morning on Madison Avenue anymore. It was about what led up to it, and what had been ignored after. Kenton didn't start with accusations. He started with a map. Red pins, neighborhood clusters. These, he said calmly, represent all stops conducted by Officers Halcroft and Mercer over the past 5 years. The pins weren't scattered, they were dense in certain blocks, consistent in certain zip codes, disturbingly uniform in demographic overlap. This next page, Kenton continued, lists outcomes. 90% no charges filed, 80% individuals matching a single demographic profile. Body cam uploads incomplete, mislabeled, or missing in 36% of entries. Report language repeated in 71% of forms. He wasn't reading to impress, he was reading to reveal. He placed the next page down. It wasn't a series of accidents, it was a rhythm. And the rhythm didn't come from training, it came from habit. No one in the room interrupted. No one raised a voice, because this wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. And for the first time, Brent couldn't look away. So if you're still listening, if your gut twisted somewhere between the map and the numbers, ask yourself something bold. When does silence turn into consent? When do the words, "just doing our job," become a way to avoid asking who that job is protecting? Share this moment. Don't wait for the headline, be the ripple that starts before the system gets loud. Because justice doesn't always roar in a courtroom. Sometimes it sits in a dull conference room and quietly rewrites what accountability looks like. Don't just watch, speak, stay, because Kenton didn't carry fire, he carried a light, and now it's ours to hold. The first voice that cracked the silence was Julian York's. No theatrics, no shaking fists. Just a man in a denim shirt who looked older than he should have, sitting at the end of the table with a copy of his complaint in his lap. 3 years ago, he began, I was stopped for a broken tail light, asked for a supervisor, got slammed against my own hood. He didn't cry, he didn't shout, he just looked up right into Brent's eyes and said, "I never even got a follow." Then came Alan Rivers, grocery bag still in hand, mistaken for a robbery suspect in his own neighborhood. "My daughter was there," he said, voice barely rising above a whisper. "She didn't talk for 3 days after." These weren't courtroom declarations. They were memories, quiet ones, scarred into the skin like old bruises. No shouting, just wounds shaped like questions that were never asked. Brent clenched his fists under the table. He remembered York. Not the details, just the report. Taillight, non-compliance, verbal escalation. He could almost see the words he typed, like they were burned onto the back of his eyelids. Lynn, beside him, stayed rigid, her arms crossed, face unreadable. But her eyes kept scanning. Too fast, too often. Brent's voice cracked when he finally whispered, "We were following protocol." Kenton didn't flinch. He simply spoke like a surgeon. When one face keeps paying for all the others, it's not protocol, it's a pattern. The phrase hit like a body blow. It wasn't shouted, it didn't have to be. Brent felt something unravel quietly inside his chest, and for the first time, Lynn didn't shoot back. She looked down. A panelist leaned forward, former officer, now investigator. "Do either of you believe your actions may have caused harm?" The question landed heavy. Brent couldn't answer. Lynn inhaled once, slow. "We did what we were taught," she said, voice quieter than expected. Kenton gave no smile, no rebuke, just a pause. Then maybe it's time we start teaching something else." The air in the room didn't shift. It stilled. Because that sentence wasn't an attack. It was a blueprint. And the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. For once the room had nothing to add. Kenton stood, not to confront, but to conclude. "I'm not here to ruin lives," he said, laying down a final page. "I'm here because systems protect what they repeat, and when repetition ignores impact, justice gets diluted until it disappears." He recommended suspensions, not permanent but indefinite. He listed names of victims whose cases should be reopened. And finally, he called for a third-party audit of every stop made under Officers Halcroft and Mercer over the last 5 years. No rage, no threats. Just paper, truth, and accountability. "You can't unsee the pattern once it's shown to you," he said. "The only choice left is what you do next." That line didn't just end the hearing. It etched itself into the room like a watermark on every nameplate. And here's where you come in. If this story stirred you, if you felt the chill in Julian's voice or the heat behind Kenton's restraint, then do something now, share it, talk about it. Don't let it be another example buried under excuses. Justice doesn't always walk in with flashing lights. Sometimes it walks in holding a folder and forces the room to look. You've seen the cracks. Now be the light that pours through them. Stay. Listen. Speak. This isn't the end. It's the shift. And someone, somewhere, is still watching. There was no gavel, no slamming of fists or outbursts when the board returned with their decision. Just a low hum of papers shuffling and a firm voice announcing what had already been written in every document Kenton had laid down. Officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer were suspended from field duty, effective immediately. Their badges would be held pending psychological review, retraining, and the full departmental audit Kenton had triggered. They didn't protest. They didn't beg. There was nothing left to argue. The walls they once stood behind had finally become mirrors, and they saw what others had lived. As Kenton packed his folder and turned to leave, Brent spoke without looking up. "I didn't think it would end like this." Kenton paused just long enough to reply, "It didn't have to." Then he walked out, not victorious, but necessary. Change didn't erupt. It seeped. Quietly, the Boise precinct began adjusting the way it moved. A new question was added to rookie orientation. Not a rule, not a policy, just a prompt. Have you ever made a mistake and learned from it? It wasn't there to shame. It was there to break the silence before it hardened. The training materials shifted, too. Real footage replaced staged drills. Cases like Kenton's became study tools, not scandals. No memo was sent declaring a transformation. But the tone in meetings changed. Officers asked more questions. Sergeants started pushing back when fit the description was the only reasoning given. None of it was dramatic. But when systems change, they don't always crack, they realign. The people who once chuckled at accountability started watching their own footage twice. That's what quiet repair looks like. Not thunder, but traction. Brent didn't put on a uniform again. He transferred to the vehicle impound department, desk work, no weapon, no boots. He didn't talk about the hearing, didn't rewrite the past, but he stopped deflecting when people mentioned Kenton's name. Some said he was bitter, others said he was listening. Lynn moved back to Wyoming. No press, no statement. She left her badge behind, declined interviews, and deactivated every profile that connected her to the case. She didn't admit fault, but she didn't deny it either. Meanwhile, some of the people who once stood quietly in that hearing room began receiving letters, not apologies, wrapped in PR, but handwritten notes from someone at City Hall. Julian York got one. Alan Rivers got a call. Not enough to erase harm, but enough to prove someone, somewhere, was still paying attention. Because justice didn't shout, it echoed. And if you've stayed with this story until now, if you've followed every step, from the cuffs to the courtroom, from the testimony to the fallout, then you know this wasn't about heroes or villains. It was about how ordinary habits become harmful when they're never questioned, about how easy it is to follow a script written in silence. Kenton Morrow didn't walk in with anger. He walked in with clarity. He didn't punish, he revealed. And once the truth was laid bare, the only thing left to decide was who would still look away. So here's your ask. Don't. Don't look away. Don't treat this story like an exception. Stay. Share it with someone who still believes authority and accountability are opposites. Talk about what it means when a man in a navy jacket isn't feared, but heard. Because sometimes kindness doesn't look like mercy. Sometimes it looks like someone standing alone in a dull room, holding a folder full of names, and refusing to let it happen again. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.